In this video we want to talk about relative and absolute cell referencing, how relative and absolute cell reference is used within a workbook. When you start working with particular situations where you'll be using percents of total and relative and absolute cell referencing, you're wanting to set it up to where you may need to reference a specific cell for a formula. This situation here, you have an expense report for Beautiful You Salon. We basically have 3 or 4 steps we want to go through. We need to determine the total column here of these values. We also need to determine the total of the rent, utilities, and then of course we need to make sure we have a grand total to work with. First step is to select the cell that we want our output in. This particular one, we want our output in the total here. There's any number of ways you can arrive at a total. You can start with the equals and put each cell reference in there, but the easiest way to do that is to use the AutoSum. If we go up to our toolbar, notice it will have AutoSum tool here. When I click on that, it highlights or sets a marquee around the values that is to the left of the total that total cell. Notice the formula also is equals sum, left parentheses, B6 colon E6, right parentheses. And what that is using is the sum function, and it's setting up a range for that particular formula. Now when we click the check mark or enter, notice that it completes the formula and or the function and puts the result or the output of that function in the cell. Now the next step we want to do is we want to copy this formula or this function, the sum function, from this cell to the rest of these cells. And we do that by using the fill handle. Notice when I mouse over the lower right hand corner of the active cell or the cell pointer, there's a little black square. When I put my mouse on that square, it turns to a black cross. At that point I want to click with my left mouse button and hold and then drag straight down. Notice as I drag down, it is putting a broken marquee around those cells, and then when I release, it finishes and puts the results of those sum functions in the rest of the cells. Now if we come back up here and we select our first one, and then we use our cursor keys to arrow down, take note of the cell references in your formula bar. As I arrow down, notice how the row is changing but the column isn't. This particular concept is what's known as relative cell reference. As the function is being copied from one cell to the next, it changes the row relative to location. Now if we had done that same type thing going across columns, the column would change and the row wouldn't. So it would be changing the column relative to location. Our next step is to get the total column. So again, we select the cell just right of the total, and then again we use our sum function. Same process that we're using with as we did with the rows. The difference here is it's going to select the values above the currently selected cell because the software can see that. Again, we just click our check mark to finish that out, and then again we use our fill handle. This time we're dragging right, and this time we want to make sure the total column is also a part of that fill, because what we're setting up here is for a percent of total. So if we take a look at column B12 or cell B12, notice that in our formula bar we have B6 colon B11 is the range. Now if we start moving our cell pointer across, the columns change but the range stays the same. Now we need to insert a label into row 13, which is percent of total, and then I press my tab. Here we need to set up a formula. Formulas will always start with an equals. So I press my equal sign, and then I point and click at my first part of the formula, which this is the part, which is B12, and then I use my algebraic symbol for division, which is a /, and then I click on my grand total, or the total, which is 323,052. Now at this point we want to set this as an absolute, and we can do this any number of ways. Yes, we can type it in and put the $ symbols in. However, at this point I want to press the F4 key on my keyboard. Notice when I do that, it sets a $ in front of the F and in front of the 12. This tells the software to use only this cell reference when I use a copy and paste on this part of the activity. Of course, when I click my check mark, it's going to give me a decimal value here. And of course, to convert that to a percentage, all we need to do is just click on the % style on our toolbar, on our format toolbar. So we now have 25%. If we want that output to be more accurate, then we'd want to change, or we want to increase our decimal. So again, we would click on our toolbar, and that would increase 1, 2 using 2 decimal places. So we know that for more accuracy it's going to be 24.74%. Again, we use our fill handle. We mouse over the lower right hand corner of our cell pointer, click and hold, and then drag that to the right, and this time I want to include the total column as a part of that, and that copies that over. Now if you take a look here, and again we use our cursor keys, pay attention to our formula bar. As I move across, the column changes. Now we're in C12, but that absolute does not change. Why is that important? For example, if I use just type that in as a regular number, the total, instead of using the absolute cell reference of 323,052, when I begin to change the values up here, say for example the rent is $5 and utilities are $12, notice how the percentages and everything is updating for that particular cell, or for the outcome. Had I used the number, the total number, instead of the cell reference, that could throw or skew the output of that and would give us a false result. One situation that was working with a sheet, we did that particular situation. As we were changing those values, we saw a 5% difference in the result. Now for example, you're a bookkeeper that works for a company that does retirements, and an accountant has set up a spreadsheet using the number versus a cell reference, and you have a customer that is very wealthy, and they have a $3 million investment in a retirement, and that is 5% off. So you're looking at roughly about $300,000 that you're going to have to tell that customer they've lost because of an accounting error. That may not go over too well with that customer. So that's why it's important to make sure that you double check to make sure that your calculations are producing the outcome that they're supposed to, and that they are accurate before they are put into production. If you have questions concerning relative and absolute cell reference, please talk with your instructor, or you can rewatch this video.